Good morning, dear friends. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you've been enjoying these 5-minute reflections that we've been happy to offer you. I apologize that my last reflection I was sideways. This one I'll be right side up, I promise. How are you doing these days? I hope that you're feeling well and not suffering too much anxiety, as so many of us are. That can be deadening, can't it? By any chance, does worrying about all this keep you awake at night? I confess to being a worrier. Did you hear that bell in the back? It's affirming what I just said. There are times when I wake up, my mind starts racing about perhaps I may have screwed something up that day and I can't get back to sleep. Reflecting upon this, I remembered a poet I studied in college many years ago, the French Catholic poet Charles Péguy, who wrote at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. His poetry is simple, yet so very profound. He's been called the poet of the night. His poems often are spoken by God. God speaks. Here's a bit from one of his poems. God speaks. I don't like a man who doesn't sleep. Sleep is the friend of man. Sleep is the friend of God. I too rested on the seventh day, you know. There are men who work well, but sleep poorly, who don't sleep. What a lack of confidence in me. They can't allow me to govern their affairs for the space of one night, to take over the management and government of their affairs, as if I wasn't capable. I suppose capable of looking after them a bit. I manage plenty of other affairs, poor people. I govern creation. Surely that's more difficult. Maybe you could, without much loss, leave your affairs in my hands for the space of one night. He goes on. To sleep is to have confidence in God, to have hope. When the storm rocked the boat on the Sea of Galilee, Jesus slept while the disciples bailed, and whose action was more efficacious? The one who doesn't sleep is unfaithful to hope, and it's the greatest infidelity. A friend encouraged me to read the Holy Father's Urbi et Orbi homily on the coronavirus, which he delivered standing alone in an empty St. Peter's Square just last week. I didn't hear him, but some 11 million folks did. The Pope begins by referencing the same passage in Mark's Gospel that Charles Péguy described. He begins by referencing the thick darkness that has taken over lives, leaving us distressed. He said, like the disciples in the Gospel, we were caught off guard by an unexpected turbulent storm, this awful pandemic. We've realized that we are on the same boat, all of us fragile and disoriented. And like those disciples, with one voice we cry, we're perishing. The Pope says, it's easy to recognize ourselves in the story, but harder to understand Jesus' attitude. Jesus is asleep. In spite of the tempest, he sleeps on soundly, trusting in the Father. And the Pope points out that this is the only time in the Gospels that we see Jesus sleeping. I wonder if perhaps he's dreaming of the day that he heard his Father, his Abba, say, "You are my beloved Son." He knew all would be well. The Pope goes on, when he wakes up after calming the wind and the waters, he turns to the disciples and in a reproaching voice, why are you afraid? Have you no faith? We just received word yesterday that the bishops of Ohio have determined that there will be no public masses in the month of April in all churches. Catholics are dispensed from the Sunday obligation to attend Mass through May 4th. Like all folks everywhere in our country, we're encouraged to stay at home. Our church building, like most churches, will remain closed. And for sure, that can cause a sense of unease. In the middle of St. Bernard, on perhaps the highest point in St. Bernard, like in the middle of so many communities, the church is the anchor. When we're there, especially when times are tough, somehow it all feels better. But hear this, dear brothers and sisters, while the church building is closed, the church, the body of Christ, is alive and well. Because we remain united in love and in prayer for one another and for all suffering persons. Jesus is fully alive in our midst. That's the church. We continue to reach out to those in need through our food pantry. We serve however we can. The Pope, in his homily, said, in this storm, the facade of those stereotypes with which we camouflage our egos, always worrying about our image, has fallen away, uncovering once more that blessed common belonging of which we cannot be deprived. Our belonging as brothers and sisters. Like the disciples, we will experience that with Jesus on board, there will be no shipwreck. Because this is God's strength, the Pope proclaims, turning to the good everything that happens to us, even the bad things. He brings serenity into our storms, because with God, life never dies. Well, dear friends, I pray you and I sleep well tonight. Now, if I may, just an invitation for you to tune in at 4 p.m. tomorrow afternoon for the Friars' celebration of the Palm Sunday liturgy. And I'm happy to announce that from 11:30 to 1:30 on Sunday morning, pending good weather, or at least no rain, we'll be outside distributing palms. If you pull your car north on Vine Street, pull over to the curb, lower the window, we'll give you a blessed palm. We'll have gloves on, a blessed palm, and also a paper that has some prayers and activities and a blessing. So be at peace.